I want to give you a hypothetical scenario, and for this, we're going to take it back to high school. Let's say that you're about to miss a week of school because you're going away. Your older brother is getting married on a cruise. The cruise is that week. You obviously can't miss this cruise, and the only way the cruise was going to happen was during the school year. In this hypothetical scenario, it's Friday, March 2nd, and the cruise is running from Sunday, March 4th through Sunday, March 11th, so you're missing the 5th through the 9th. In your geometry class, there's a test that's being assigned on Monday, March 5th. Being the student that you are, you let the teacher know that you're going to be missing school for that week. However, because you don't want to worry about that test, you want to take it before you go on vacation. The teacher agrees, and you take the test on Thursday, March 1st during your lunch period. Now it's March 2nd, and in class, the purpose of the lesson is to review for the test, as in the test that you already took. The teacher comes up to you and says, okay, so here's the deal. This lesson obviously doesn't apply to you because you're not going to be here and you already took the test. So why don't you just do something by yourself? I can't have you leave the classroom because that would be a really bad look on me. But just play by yourself for this time. Go on your phone, get some work done for other classes, doodle, just put your head down and take a nap. As long as you don't bother me or anyone else, do whatever the heck you want. You may have had a similar experience to that at some point in your high school days, where you were in a class that didn't apply to you, and you could basically do whatever the heck you wanted. So why do I bring that scenario up? Because while you wouldn't think that something like this would be applicable in the NFL, and while you wouldn't think that an NFL team would genuinely employ this strategy during practice, that's exactly what happened as a result of one of the strangest failed trades of all time. The man you've been watching this whole time is quarterback Ed Hargett, who was on the Houston Oilers, but you're seeing him in highlights of his time with the New Orleans Saints for reasons that will become very apparent in just a little bit. However, in 1974, Ed Hargett was part of one of the strangest practice sessions of all time, where the coaches just had him practice by himself and do whatever the heck he wanted to. It's a bizarre story that half a century later deserves a deep dive today, because this is the story behind Ed Hargett and one of the strangest practices and strangest failed trades in the history of the NFL. Before we start the video, make sure that you hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel, because we post every single day on here about the weird and the wacky history of this great league, and we're trying to grow this community as much as possible. Thanks in advance for your support, and with that in mind, let's talk about the practice where, for all intents and purposes, Ed could have laid in bed. Before I talk about the actual incident in question, we need some context to understand just who Ed Hargett was and what his role was with the Houston Oilers at the time. The Saints drafted the Texas A&M quarterback in the 16th round of the 1969 combined NFL-AFL draft with pick number 397. And already, just for playing multiple seasons in the NFL, he beat the odds and deserves his flowers. When you were picking in the 16th round back then, it was a complete crapshoot. Of the 26 players drafted in that round, only 5 of them even so much as played a single down in the NFL. And there were multiple quarterbacks taken way ahead of him who never played in the NFL, like Larry Good, Bob Belden, and Ed Roseborough. So for Hargett to carve a career for a little bit in professional football is a heck of an accomplishment. As for how well he played when he was on the field, that's a bit of a different story. Because even though Hargett was a successful college quarterback with the Aggies, even leading the Southwest Conference in touchdown passes in 1967, and having back-to-back seasons to end his career, where he finished inside the top 10 in the entire NCAA in that category, his NFL success was, shall we say, limited at best. There were very few highlights of Hargett available when he was on the field, and it's not too hard to see why. In 4 seasons with the Saints, Hargett threw 11 touchdowns and 10 interceptions, only winning 1 of his 8 starts. He was not the most accurate quarterback in the world, as he completed less than 47% of his passes while with the Saints, including under 45% of his passes in 1970 while starting 4 games. It's no wonder why the Saints, when given the opportunity to draft Archie Manning in 1971, pounced on that. During that 1971 season, Hargett had what might have been the worst start by a quarterback in Saints history, as in a 21-7 loss to the Cleveland Browns in the penultimate week of the season, he went 1 for 12 with 10 yards passing and a passer rating of 39.6 before getting benched, which is exactly what your passer rating would be if you spiked the ball into the ground on every single play. I don't know how you average under 1 yard per pass attempt and finish a game completing 8% of your passes, but Ed Hargett found a way. To give you an idea of how bad he was under center, from 1970 to 71, there were 28 quarterbacks to attempt at least 280 passes. That is not an arbitrary number, as seeing as there were 14 games in a season back then, that's an average of 10 passes per game. At the very top, you've got Sonny Jurgensen, who completed nearly 60% of his passes over that time frame. Most of the quarterbacks on this list completed slightly over 50% of his passes. But dead last at 45.2%, 28th out of 28 quarterbacks, that's Ed Hargett. Jim Hart was the only other quarterback in the same stratosphere as him from an inaccuracy standpoint. Additionally, only 5 of those 28 quarterbacks averaged less than 6 yards per pass attempt. One of them was, as you guessed it, Ed Hargett. I guess Hargett could be a serviceable backup at times. Heck, there was enough highlights that I was somehow able to throw this video together, but those were very few and far between. And with the Saints having their franchise guy in Archie Manning, in 1973, the Saints made a blockbuster 5-player trade, where as part of the trade, quarterback Ed Hargett was shipped off to Houston. Hargett was not the centerpiece of the trade. Even Oilers head coach Bill Peterson admitted that the move to get Hargett was sort of an insurance thing, seeing as they already had 2 very capable quarterbacks in the top 2 spots on the depth chart that they drafted in 1971. Those 2 guys being Dan Pastorini and Lynn Dickey, both of whom had very successful careers in the NFL. But Hargett was eager for a fresh start in Houston. As he said, "If I can play any, then I'm happy." Spoiler alert, that did not happen. Much like the 1972 season with the Saints, Hargett did not throw a single pass with the Oilers in 1973, as he was left to rot away on the bench while other guys ahead of him got reps. By the time the 1974 season rolled around, it was very clear that Ed Hargett was not going to be on the Oilers when the regular season started. Between the fact that he was buried on the depth chart, the fact that there was a new head coach in charge, as Sid Gilman was the man calling the shots, and he never wanted Hargett in the first place, and the fact that Hargett would not even be playing in the NFL in 1975 regardless, as he signed a contract to play for the Hawaiians of the upstart but financially in shambles World Football League that would have been honored if, by some miracle, the league survived a second season, there was no need for Hargett on the Oilers. I should note that it was not uncommon for players back in 1974 to sign contracts to play in the NFL and then jump to the WFL in 1975, as quite a few players did this due to the better pay and better opportunities in the WFL, even if we know that the league went up in smoke shortly thereafter. In fact, it was such a formality that Hargett was not going to be on the team in 1974 by the time the regular season started, that despite the fact that he was on the roster, his photo was not in the Oiler press book, which otherwise listed every other player on the team. Long story short, he was gone. However, the Oilers were able to find a trade partner and were able to find someone to take on Hargett at whatever value he had left, which wasn't a lot, seeing as he hadn't thrown a pass over the past 2 seasons and was gone in 1975 anyways. Because in the middle of camp in August of 1974, the Detroit Lions were in the process of striking a deal to get Ed Hargett to be in their quarterback room as either the number 2 or the number 3 quarterback. And with the trade on the horizon, Oilers head coach Sid Gilman had some bizarre instructions to his quarterback. "We can't have you leave the team and just go home, because that would be a really bad look for everyone. Rumors would fly that you quit the team and that you have an attitude issue. People would think that something's up and that we're trying to hide something. Some players might be upset because you don't have to show up to practice even though you're on the team, so why should I? Some people would think it's a disciplinary issue. You get the idea. There's all sorts of things that can be reported on and could circulate. And we don't want anything of that. We don't want any drama whatsoever. On the other hand, we can't have you practicing with us. You're not going to be here in a few days, and we don't want you taking away reps from guys who will be there. We don't want you potentially revealing critical intel to the team we're about to trade you to, and we don't want you taking up that space and wasting the time of our coaches and whatnot. So, we're going to have you practice, but you're going to practice by yourself. In other words, if you've ever seen the scene of The Simpsons where Milhouse is throwing the frisbee to himself because he has no one to play with, yeah, that's what the Oilers were having Ed Hargett do. While they worked on this trade, seeing as they knew he wasn't going to be with the Oilers any longer, Hargett was to stay in the facility and just practice by himself. Said Hargett, I asked him who they were going to trade me to, and Coach Gilman said he didn't know yet. Coach Gilman told me I could run on my own or do whatever I wanted to, but he didn't want me to work with the team. I asked him if I could go home, and he said no, just to stay here in camp because it might look bad if I went home and wasn't in camp. In other words, just stay here and tend to your own devices and work alone. You know when you have to keep yourself entertained outside and you're all by yourself? That's what Ed Hargett had to do here in what had to be some extremely awkward and bizarre practice sessions. Maybe he was picking grass during these sessions for all I know. I don't know what you do by yourself in practice, but that's what Ed Hargett was having to do here. And the grand irony in all of this is that the trade didn't even end up mattering, because even though the Oilers did end up finalizing that trade with the Lions, the trade got rescinded because Hargett failed the physical due to a knee issue. So you had a guy who the organization made it very clear that they didn't want around anymore, and they were actively trying to get rid of, to the point where they had him practicing by himself without any contact from their teammates or coaches. And now, that guy was coming back to the team because the trade didn't go through because of a failed physical. Yep, that went about as well as you'd expect. This man right here, Ed Hargett, had quite the unusual stretch of days, and he was not too happy about how everything played out, as when he was inevitably released by the Oilers and got to sign with the Hawaiians early and jump to the WFL midseason, completely unprompted, he took a shot at Gilman, saying, Sid is a cold person who doesn't care about anybody. Tell him how you really feel, Ed. Tell him how you really feel. Hargett never played in the NFL again, and he definitely never played for Sid Gilman again, I know that much. On one hand, I completely get why Sid Gilman did what he did. If you're trying to trade a guy, especially in 1974, when news does not travel all that fast, and when the negotiating process might be a bit slower, you can't have the guy practice with your team, and you can't have him leave, because then the rumor mill can start, especially since those practices are open to the media, and they can write down some things that may give off a false impression of the situation and what Ed Hargett is like as a teammate. On the other hand, yeah, I get why Ed Hargett was angry about the entire thing, because this had to be an extremely awkward situation to be told to just work by himself and to practice on his own, especially if it's not being used as a punishment method. For an NFL player to spend an entire practice completely left to his own devices, with no coaches to guide him, no trainers to assist him, and no players to work with, seems incredibly bizarre, especially for a quarterback. But that's what happened in 1974 with Ed Hargett, even if the reasoning for it didn't end up mattering in the end because of a failed physical. Because in 1974, Sid Gilman made it extremely obvious that when it came to the terms of his chances of making the roster, Ed was better off dead. Be sure to like and subscribe if you have not done so already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and check out my other channels, JG8 for the history of college football, JG7 for the history of baseball, and JG9 News, where we talk about all things happening in the NFL. Join me every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, where we'll play live NFL trivia for cash prizes. And make sure to join me live, as we're on stream just about every single day. And thanks to all our Patreon members and our YouTube members for helping out the channel. See how you become a member and show your support financially in the description down below.